Hello everyone, today I'm going to be taking a look at Armoured Clash and the Enlightened faction and the best ways to get started into it. So in front of me I have a skirmish force for Armoured Clash. Ignore the big resin piece at the moment, the wells, we'll come back to it. But what you see in front of you here is what constitutes the introductory set. So you get a resin commander for the citizen soldiers. There are two sets of brutes, wardens and support. There's a set of seeker cav. There's the heavy constructs, the Mars and the Europa walkers. There's some Sickle Gyro cav. There's mono and strider cav, little Hellions, and finally the K9 gun dogs. So this represents the sort of the plastics, the two different types, your light and heavy factions or units for the tabletop. Enlightened are probably the easiest set of figures to get into, to get on the tabletop for Armoured Clash. With a lot of the other factions, there are options for some of the units within the box, so you need to have an idea of how the game plays, what you want in your list, and then make the decision which you're going to build. Are they going to be assault dragoons or ranged blackwatch for your crown? Are you going to have your temple dogs as gun dogs or not for the empire? There's a lot of little units that have multiple options for your list building. Here with Enlightened, what you see is what you get pretty much. So everything forward is just off the sprue. There are options in there for maybe arm types here, but they don't make any difference in game terms. They're just build options to make your heavy constructs look a little bit different. The only in-game options you need to worry about are for the Mars pattern walkers and the Europa crawlers. They have some options on the sprue, like transport, close or heavy long-ranged weaponry. And those are the only things you have to worry about. Everything else is just a case of clip it off, paint it up, and away you go. So very straightforward when it comes to list building. If you want to go beyond this, and this would be a skirmish force with sort of half-size units, the next scale up game would be the likes of the faction. The faction set contains double the plastics that you see here. However, you can field those as a double-sized unit, so you could field these as 16 bases of citizen soldiery or 8 monocav, or you can still field them as 2 4-man units of monocav. It's up to you. As the units get bigger, their discipline gets better, they can take more hits, and they have a bigger damage output as well. But sometimes area control of a board means that you might want to have these units spread out a bit more. If you do go for the faction though, you do get the big chunky piece of resin. So the Wells Walker comes in there as well. It has a couple of options that we'll get to later on. Another way of getting it, if you have the introductory set, is to pick up the Wells Battlegroup Set. So it contains the Walker and then the mechanical side of the plastics. So you don't get all the infantry and some of the cavalry options that you see here, but you do double up on walkers and some of the more robotic personalities within it. So let's take a look at units then and how they sort of perform on the tabletop. And we'll start with the citizen soldiery. They are a mainstay unit, so they're one of the core units that you're going to be fielding with the Enlightened. Game-wise, they're roughly the same whether they're attacking light or heavy targets. They don't have a huge amount of dice either way, and they have a relatively short range, as most infantry do with their rifles. They do have the potential to throw out some suppression onto things, which is a sort of a feature the Enlightened seem to be fond of, suppressing their opponent with a lot of weird electroshock weaponry is the way to go. In the introductory set, you get the little resin commander upgrades, which means that this could be run as a command stand of citizen soldiery rather than just a regiment or platoon of citizen soldiery. Gives them the command ability, so they can use their overall command within the army itself because you need to have a commander for a faction. It also gives them peer review, which is a buff for constructs. A lot of this force is made up of constructs. They don't do well off their own bat. They really need somebody to give them orders, point them in the right direction, reset their punch cards and wind them up, in which case that's what you're after. If you have multiple boxes, or if you don't have the introductory, then you can just use a regular standard bearer and officer to make it into a standard platoon. But even if you have the introductory set, it doesn't really matter if you have a resin commander in there in the long run. So they are your general boots on the ground, there to hold objectives or to deny objectives to your opponent. So here we have the Brute Wardens, both Brute variants in here. The Wardens and the Cohort are berserkers, so they have to test if they're not within discipline range of somebody like a commander. Otherwise they go herring off with a frenzied berserk rage, which is fine for the Wardens, who are a melee only unit. They want to get up there and smash things badly. However, the Brute Cohort, which actually has a ranged attack, probably you don't want them running off helter-skelter all over the place when they're actually supposed to be doing a job. The Wardens also have Shrouded, so they have a potential to actually get into combat without taking too much devastating fire. But they are both bulky troops, which means when it comes to transport and capacity, they take up a bit more room than your average bear. So they're either going to be walking on their own two legs or somebody else's two legs. It isn't the Enlightened after all. Or you're going to be transporting them, but then having to deal with the fact that you're not getting quite as many in there, or you're having to get more transports for larger units than you particularly want. But both units they're very beaty. They've got short range with the Cohort, so a short to medium ranged attack. Again, very good at handing out suppression to people, or in the case of the Wardens, shock as well. They also have a devastating attack on the Cohort, so where you have a spare hit that normally would be discarded if they're not reaching the damage level or the defense level of your opponent, then you get a bonus success essentially gets through from the devastating attack that they are wielding. So the little brutes are quite tasty in that regard. They're a good, solid, albeit small unit, but because they are constructs, they have the potential to soak as much damage as the larger unit of citizen soldiery does, and then just keep on ploughing through. Bigger again, though, are the heavy constructs. So the heavy construct Devastator Cohort, as it's known to its friends, they are brutal deluxe, I think. If the Wardens are brutal, these are brutal deluxe. They do a bit of both of the Warden Cohort. In melee, they are absolutely terrifying. They are also berserkers and bullies. They will tear off at a moment's notice to punch face everywhere. But they do also have a relatively short-ranged, annoying attack. Again, they throw out a lot of devastation and suppression in their wake. So they're a good second wave, or potentially even first wave, although you don't want to be paying the points to see them taken off the battlefield by a lot of focus fire. So having a few waves going in front, whether it's the Wardens or the citizen soldiery, they get softened by enemy fire, but by the time these guys arrive, whatever the damage they do, they will lift people off. They do roughly double their attacks in melee as they do from shooting, but they still have the potential to do quite a bit when they're coming in, shooting people up and softening the target for the inevitable charge. And then once they get in there and charge, they do have overrun. So if they manage to clear the way, they can plow on further, which will really give your opponent pause for thought, because they are a sort of a linebacker unit. They will break through and just keep on going, at which point your opponent will probably have to pull somebody back to reinforce whatever has just been nuked by them. So yes, the Frankenstein's monster of the Enlightened, and aren't they a delightful set of monsters? A bit smaller in the way of constructs, but much more nimble, are the Seeker Cav. Technically, they are infantry, even though their legs have been replaced by a giant monowheel. Go figure. They have a general sort of 4-inch infantry move, but they do have locomotive boosters. So when they need to get into a charge or into position very quickly, they've got a little extra punch to them, a little turbo boost to get them there where they need to be. Only really good against light targets on the tabletop. They do have a bonus for point blank range though, so getting them into those positions where they can get up close and do some devastating fire on people right in their face is a great way of using them. Their defenses too, so they're the same as the Wardens and the hulking brutes. They'll only take 1 point of damage before they get lifted off, but it does mean your opponent's going to have to focus fire a bit to get through that sort of defensive buffer to begin with. But when they get up there, they do have a decent melee attack as well. So really it's up to you if you want to tie your opponent up in melee, or if you want to just sort of outgun them at point blank range is also a very valuable or valid target. So either or, they're I would think of more as light infantry cav. They're not going to have the speed of cavalry or bikes or whatever to get up there quickly, but they do have that potential for the little boost to get them where they need to be. However, if you are after something a bit nippier, the K9 gun dogs are the way to go. So the K9 gun dogs are technically heavy cavalry. They have a standard 5-inch move, but then they have that bonus because they are cavalry when it comes to charging in. However, they are a gun dog pack, which means you may not want to charge them in if you don't have to. In melee, they are automata, so it's relatively difficult to break them, comparatively speaking to actual humans who value their lives. But they do have a devastating attack against light targets, and then an adequate attack against heavy. So dice-wise, they're about the same, but with the devastating keyword coming in, the trait comes into play against light targets. So it gives you that potential to take an extra standoff or do an extra bit of damage, which could be what you need when you're looking to break people. Because they're automata though, it does mean they are not going to be capable of taking targets for you. So objective markers and that sort of thing, you're still going to have to deal with somebody who actually knows what they're doing rather than just a dog with a ticker tape timer running through its head to know where to go and how to do it. But a nice little unit of 5 of those as well. If you want something a bit faster again though, or potentially faster, we have the Hellions. So a gyro stabilized jump jet unit. They are the weakest constructs we've looked at so far. So the defense is 1 and they can only take 1 damage before they go away. So they need a bit of protection, or you need to make sure that you're using them wisely. They have obviously the potential to be very nippy on the battlefield. They have hit and run, so they can engage and then leave before your opponent gets a chance to deal with them. They can also scout using Vanguard at the start of the game, so they get an extra push up the field depending on where you've deployed them. You may want to use that to get a bit further so you're better positioned for a following turn. Or you can use their soar ability because they have those jump packs. They can take off and then come back in at the relevant time in the follow-up turn anywhere they want to, really. They can just pivot behind an opponent, land, and then do some devastating attacks and then hit and run. So a maneuverable flying or jumping infantry unit, handy to have, good for grabbing objectives. They only have a melee attack though, so you're not going to be shooting people off. You are going to be using that hit and run to get in, do damage, and then retreat, peel off and hide away, maybe draw things into a melee that they don't want to be in, or leave them with the question that if they don't turn around to face your Hellions, then they're going to have to deal with them. And if they do turn around, then they're obviously no longer a threat for somebody coming up the table from your own deployment line. So I quite like jump cav or jump troops. They are worth their weight in gold when it comes to maneuvering around the tabletop and putting threat into different areas. Speaking of flying threat, the Sickle gyrocopters. Like the Hellions, they also have Vanguard. However, a more expansive Vanguard of 12 inches rather than 7. They can also do a hit and run, and again their distance for their flee at the end of that hit and run is a bit greater than the Hellions have. They do have a ranged attack because they are little flying shooty ships. They are only going to be capable of engaging light targets, but they can also engage aerial targets. And with the introduction of flyers for all of the factions so far, it does mean the potential is out there to have to do some anti-aircraft dogfighting as you maneuver around the tabletop. So these have that capability. They are not going to be as maneuverable as the Hellions. Obviously the bases are a bit bigger, and so sort of fighting street to street is a little trickier for them. But at the same time, they have the potential to offer both threat going forward and defensive capabilities against other aerial targets on the tabletop. So the Sickle, Gyro, Cav are a nice offensive and defensive set of flyers. Leaving the flyers aside and taking a look at a couple of our last cavalry units, we're going to start with the Mono-Cav. Also have the potential to do hit and run attacks. They are constructs again. They can soak a fair bit of damage with a defensive 3. However, they only have a damage rating of 1. So when those 3 go through, they will lose a stand. But they have a decent attack against light targets, and they also have impact. So they have the potential just to run over people's heads. Being a construct cav as well, they also have those locomotive boosters, so they get that little extra revving the engine when they need to get there. So a nice combination of the hit and run that the Striders or the Sickle and the Hellions have, but the Mono-Cav just bring it back down to street level and have a bit more oomph to them. Unlike the Hellions, who might get picked off very easily, with a defensive 3, they should be able to take a fair amount of fire before they start falling over, so they can get into some nice tight corners and deal a lot of damage. Working off a similar chassis is the Strider Cav. So the Strider Cav are pioneers, so they can get into the places they need to be and do the damage that is required of them when your opponent is attempting to dig in for all tomorrow. They are only melee troops, but they are devastating and suppressive. So, and again, you've got a high defense with them, even though their damage rating is relatively low. When they get into combat, they're going to put out a lot of damage and tie up a unit or force them back out of position. So very good for embedded or garrison infantry units that are dug in somewhere trying to hold on to an objective. You can send your little pioneer Strider Cav in and dig them out with your mechanical ticks, which is a nice way of doing things. So then taking a look at some of our bigger walkers, and we're going to start with the actual crawlers. So there are 3 variants that can be made in the box. I have 2 here, so we can see the melee variant, which is the Callisto Gatherer. As you might expect, no ranged weapons. It's all about stomping up there very slowly and then taking your opponent apart bit by bit and harvesting whatever you've killed or dismantled. It's all very important for Enlightened to bring back what they've destroyed. So it can be recycled and upscaled, which is, the way to go with the Enlightened. If you fancy something a bit more ranged, there are 2 ranged variants. There's the Europa and the Enceladus. The Europa is a mortar that obviously has indirect fire, very good at heavy targets, slow-moving armoured stuff that's far away, poorer against the likes of light targets or fast-moving stuff. So really you're going to want to drop massive bombs onto heavy incoming tanks, whatever they happen to be. It's the way to go with that. But the other version then, the Enceladus, has a gun that's a bit more direct fire capable. It can engage light, heavy and aerial units on the tabletop. So it has a bit more of a rounded complement of weaponry depending on what you want to do. Obviously, there's an awful lot of stuff in your force that's very good against light and very good against targets in melee as well. So potentially looking at something like the Europa artillery to drop those mortar shells on the heavy vehicles or heavy infantry isn't a bad idea, but you obviously have variations within the crawler category. Finally, for plastic, there are the amazing tripods. The chances of anything coming from Mars, they tell me. So with our Martian tripods here, we're in a similar position to the crawlers in that there are 3 variants and they each do something slightly different on the table. So you have the Deimos variant, which is good against light targets and against aerial, so it gives you a bit of that anti-aircraft that you may want. There is the standard Mars tripod, which is essentially your mainline battle tank. It's good against light and heavy. And then finally you have the Phobos, which is a melee variant, and then it can also attack light troops, but it's not going to be great against heavies. Again, it's one of these things where when you're looking at everything else in the force, which ones you go for, maybe where you see the weaknesses or the deficiencies in what you have. So you may want to lean into some of the Mars to begin with, because it gives you a bit more heavy capability from range rather than relying solely on melee. You don't want to find yourself having to play chase the tank around the tabletop because all of your heavy guns are gone. It can be very demoralizing for people having to run around after them. So 3 variants in there, and all with a decent battlefield rule. Again, I think you're going to see more of the anti-aircraft coming to play now that aerial units are a bit more prevalent and have the potential to devastate people. But those are our Martian tripods. Finally, the big resin fellow. So we have here the wells. Okay, so our big ranged monstrosity here, the enormous resin Spydro of Doom, is the Wells Heavy Surveyor. There are options for the Wells. It can be also built as the Horsell. The Horsell has a melee and light capability. It's got a ton of additional special rules and traits that are available for it. But if you think about it in those terms, it's another get up close and rip things apart. Very good if your opponent is also rocking some form of massive land ship, a huge honking piece of armor on the table. Stomp up to it and then remove it plate by plate if you need to. But the Wells, I think a lot of people will be fielding solely because it has a diverse amount of weaponry. So it doesn't have the huge number of melee attacks that the Horsell has, but it's got a decent amount of melee attacks if people are stupid enough to get close to it. It also has both a coruscating attack, which means you can draw a line out to 22 inches for its light weaponry, and anything in that line gets hit as it just beam weapons through various intervening people. On top of that, there's also a few weapons that can be overcharged if you're attacking either aerial or heavy targets, and overcharging is flip a card from your command deck. The number on that is the number of extra die you roll. At the end though, any blanks from your actual attack roll that are sitting there that haven't been re-rolled and negated end up being damage on you. So you can pump extra power to the weapon batteries to do a devastating attack. You can kill the Wells with it, but it doesn't matter because the attack will still go off. So it's obviously something for your opponent to worry about when he's striding across the battlefield like a colossus. So that's the range of your introductory set, and also the Wells battle group if you happen to be after the super heavy. Like I say, I think as far as force composition goes, this is one of the most straightforward for a new player because there's not a lot of choices to make, really just for the walkers. Do you need extra guns, or do you want some more aerial or melee attacks going in there? And I think for beginners, build them as the gun versions. Build them as the Mars, build them as maybe the Europa, and then you've got that additional heavy support from range, and then let everything else get up close and personal and take your opponent apart bit by bit, point blank, with a lot of suppression, shock, and massive undead constructs punching people in the face until they go away. So there we have it. That is the Enlightened. Hopefully that gives you a rough idea of how the faction breaks down and the sort of things they are capable of on the tabletop. Let me know what you think below. Until next time, bye-bye.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.